Hello, fellow miracle workers. Thanks for joining me for another weekly Wednesday wisdom video. It's hump day and I'm on the road again, which means I'm in a hotel again with this crappy lighting, but I'm going to flow with it and see what happens because I have some valuable information, I hope valuable, to share with you this week. And I want to talk about feeling like a victim, which is something all of us have experienced, because yesterday I made a very inadvertently controversial post on my personal Facebook page. Maybe it was the day before. Anyway, it said that it's not about what's going on out there or what anybody is doing out there. It's about your desire to feel like a victim. Now, I probably didn't word this the best possible way because it stirred up a lot of upset in my community. I had a lot of people who were students of A Course in Miracles that understood what point I was trying to make and kind of jumped on the bandwagon and agreed. But there were several people that were outraged, upset, and accusatory towards me, and it erupted into a whole lot of engagement, a whole lot of discussion, a whole lot of conversation, and a whole lot of misunderstanding, which I have spent the last 24 hours trying to straighten out. But since there was so much interest in this topic, and since there was so much misunderstanding about it, I thought I would get on tonight and make that the topic of my discussion for this week. So, obviously, no one wants to feel like a victim, consciously or intentionally. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, oh, today I think I'll feel like a victim and I'll look for evidence of people abusing me and treating me wrong. Of course, no one goes through life like that consciously. However, I made the statement because I had noticed not only in my personal friendships with people in the world, physical friendships, but also my Facebook friendships with people in different spiritual communities, that there is a constant habit and theme, and there's a constant showing up of people complaining about certain things as if they were victims. And by this I mean they complain about the price of gas and how it's making their life hard. This is coming from a victim mindset. Yes, the price of gas is high. Yes, everybody's paying more for it than they used to. Does that make you a victim? No, it's just a fact. You can choose to feel like a victim, and you can choose to feel like the oil companies or the government are victimizing you, taking advantage of you, making your life hard in some way. But that is not a fact. That is a perspective. So this is what I wanted to address. All during the pandemic, I saw people constantly complaining about their freedoms being taken away, being forced to wear masks, being forced to stay home, being forced to do this, being forced to do that. That is a victim mindset. No one is intentionally out to get you. That is something the ego believes. The ego tells us this story to try and keep us safe, to try and protect us, but it does not protect us. Instead, what happens is it makes our life miserable. We don't need those kinds of thoughts. They don't serve us, they don't help us, and they don't make us happy. So this is what I was pointing to. However, what happened was several of my Facebook community friends who have suffered real physical abuse, sexual molestation, traumas, and horrors in their life became outraged that I would suggest that no one had ever been victimized. So here's what I want to make clear. Yes, bad things happen and happen to people all the time. We always have a choice with no matter what happens to us as adults to get stuck in this mentality in the past, in this story of I was mistreated and I was a victim and I am a victim and I want to make somebody else wrong and I want to blame somebody else so that I can stay in this energy of poor, pitiful, helpless me. At one time, you may have been a helpless child. You may have been abused. You may have been victimized. None of us grew up, I don't think, in completely unconditionally loving, perfect families. All of us grew up with some form of dysfunction in our family. And the more I talk to people, the more I learn that we all have skeletons in our closet, because these things are generational and they get passed down from one generation to the next. So if there's addiction in your family, it's coming from, that's emotional pain management, and it's coming from a very wounded place that goes back to your ancestors. It didn't just suddenly show up overnight. So we've all had to deal with things, and some of us have had to deal with some really horrific things. But carrying the energy of that story with us through our lives does not help us. We need to release that and let it go and move on. And here's where the ego becomes outraged, because the ego will say, I'm not letting anybody off the hook. I need to hold people accountable. I need to make sure that people answer for their abuses. And if I say that I'm not a victim, then that means they're not a victimizer. And we get stuck in this duality of right and wrong, good and bad. And this is the place where nobody wins. So my suggestion is to take that victim story, to take that hurt, to take that woundedness, and to use it to rise like the phoenix from the ashes and transcend that energy, to learn from the lesson, to understand that just because it was that way once doesn't mean it's that way always, to use it to have more compassion for other people who are suffering in the world. But that doesn't mean we have to go on a crusade to go out and right all the wrongs on the planet. A Course in Miracles, my spiritual practice, says the sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for oneself. You need to take care of your business. I need to take care of my business. It's not my job to right all the wrongs in the world. It's my job to make sure that I'm happy and healthy, and that I'm doing the things that bring me joy, and that I'm making the most of this one precious life that I have, and that I'm living up to my potential. And it's not my job to control other people or make other people do things. So we were having this discussion, and actually, I started to feel like I was being attacked by several people. And the funny thing and the ironic thing is that I made this statement about how we all have this like secret innate desire to feel like a victim. And I started to feel like a victim. I started to feel like, this is my Facebook page. I should be able to post what I want. Why are people attacking me? And it was an interesting exercise for me to see how quickly the mind changes into that mode when given the opportunity. It's a very bad habit, and it's one that we have to be vigilant for, because it keeps us in this low vibrational energy that serves nobody. So I was trying to be careful not to argue with people or make other people wrong, but to hear their perspective and hear what they had to say. And interestingly enough, and I was pleased with myself, 2 or 3 of the people that initially started off attacking me and accusing me came around, and we met in the middle, and we made up as friends. And then a couple of people who were on the bandwagon about, victimhood is real and you don't know what you're talking about, they befriended each other and they went off their merry way to have their low energy, low vibe thing somewhere else. But during the course of this conversation, 2 things that came up were accusations towards me of gaslighting and spiritual bypassing. So I want to just talk a little bit about those things in case you're not familiar with them, because this is terminology that is used a lot in spiritual communities, and I feel like it's misused sometimes, or that it's used to position some people as better than other people, which is not what spirituality is about. We are all equal here. We are all equal in spirit, equally loved, equally divine. And as soon as one person is trying to suggest that somebody else is at fault or doing something wrong or blaming somebody, then it goes into this egoic realm. So gaslighting is actually based on a movie. The term comes from a movie called Gaslight, which came out in 1944. And it starred Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer. And in the movie, I've never actually seen the movie, but I know that in the movie, they were newlyweds, and all of a sudden, Ingrid Bergman, her character, started to notice weird things going on, like pictures disappearing off the wall and lights turning on and off. And her husband, Charles Boyer, discounted her observations and invalidated her experience. And what was actually going on was he was a narcissistic personality type who was manipulating her and the situation to try and make her think that she was crazy. For what purpose, I don't know. Maybe he was trying to get her committed so he could inherit her fortune or something. I'll have to watch the movie sometime to find out. But in any case, the term gaslighting has come to mean invalidating someone else's experience. But from my perspective, it's with the very manipulative purpose of taking control or having authority over that other person. And so I was certainly not trying to gaslight anybody in my Facebook conversation. I certainly am not invalidating anyone's experience of pain and suffering. I'm fully aware that pain and suffering happens on this planet all the time. This is a world of decay and death. Nothing's permanent here. Nothing's permanently wonderful here from the ego perspective. So I wasn't trying to invalidate anybody's experience, but what I wanted to shine light on is that that experience does not have to last forever. That experience is, because it happened in the past, doesn't mean that it's your destiny. It can be transcended. So one of the things that happens with trauma is that we have upsetting experiences, and the emotions associated with those experiences get locked into the body at the cellular level. You know, when you look back in your childhood, you don't remember the everyday boring things that happened. You remember the highlights. You remember the things that were really upsetting or the things that were really exciting. And those, you know, when you have adrenaline spikes because something extremely emotional happened, those are the memories that get locked in. And if that memory is traumatic, it gets locked in into the body, actually physically into the body, and it needs to be released through some kind of somatic work, through therapy like EMDR or hypnotism, or I'm no specialist in trauma therapy. I'm not a psychologist. That is a whole different realm of another modality that's needed to process these kinds of emotions so they can be released. I do know that when you don't feel it, it wreaks havoc with your system. Feelings buried alive never die. They stay in your system, and then they come up repeatedly as you age, as either flashbacks to something bad that happened once, or something happens now in the present or in the future, and it feels like something that happened bad in the past. And so we suddenly go into this fight or flight mode of feeling endangered now, even though we're not in any danger. So I'm fully aware of that, and I was not trying to suggest in any way, shape, or form that anybody can just think positive and that will go away. I know that it doesn't work that way. However, I shouldn't say however. I'll leave that at that. I wanted to go on to spiritual bypassing because this is really where the rubber meets the road. So spiritual bypassing is a term that is used in spiritual communities to suggest that someone doesn't deal with these feelings that I was just talking about, but they just pretend that everything is sweetness and light and ignore the problem and say it's all good and why can't we all just get along, we're all one, and then the problem continues to fester for the reasons that I just explained because it has not been addressed. And there are levels to this thing. So I want to make that very clear. When somebody is at a very low vibrational level of constantly feeling filled with shame, with guilt, with anger, with these kinds of frequencies and these kinds of feelings from trauma that they've experienced, that stuff has to be processed. You can't just jump from here to here and say, oh, it's all good, and life suddenly becomes miraculous and perfect. It doesn't work that way. You have to process these things and move through these feelings, feel them, release them, sometimes repeatedly, and then eventually work your way up. I don't know if you've seen that chart by Dr. David Hawkins that shows the vibrational frequencies of different feelings, but shame is the very lowest frequency on the chart, followed by guilt, followed by anger. So anger's better than shame, because at least when you're angry, you have some energy. When you're filled with shame, you're just in a funk and you're in depression and you can't do anything. When you start to feel anger, at least there's some movement and some energy, and you can address something. But you don't want to stay in anger forever. Obviously, nobody wants to walk around angry all the time. That's not productive. So then the chart goes up to higher frequencies of acceptance, and then peace, and then love is at the very top, and there's a bunch of ones in between that I skipped over. So this is the work. This is our spiritual work, is to process these lower feeling vibrational energies and emotions, feel them, release them, so that we can move up this. And in A Course in Miracles, this is called this is a ladder. It's described as a ladder. Down here, when we have these horrible negative emotions all the time ruling our life, we're at the bottom rung. And as we process these feelings and we move up this ladder, we go from this nightmare of a life experience to a happy dream. That's the top of the ladder. And for many people, they feel like they're up and down all the time. You know, when things are going their way and they're happy, life is good. And then as soon as something bad happens, boom, they're back down in the negative energies. And this is not a fun way to live either. This is a horrible way to live, down in the nightmare all the time. And then this is a very stressful and difficult way to live, going back and forth. So little by little, we can work our way up the ladder until you can be in a place where you can stay here in peace, love, and joy pretty much all the time. That is physically feasible and possible. And then A Course in Miracles says that God takes the last step and pulls us up. We have no control over that last step into heaven. So going up the ladder, doing this kind of ladder work, which they also call it in 12-step work, ladder work, is a process of spiritual enlightenment. This is how I see it. You start off with all these heavy feelings, and then you release the feelings, and you start to feel lighter and lighter and lighter. And when you can get to this place where you're feeling peace, love, and joy pretty consistently, that's enlightenment. And then awakening. So this is all still part of a dream life that we're having here. And then awakening comes when God takes the last step and pulls us up, and we wake up. Now, you'll hear a lot of people talk about woke culture, and they'll say that they're woke and you need to get woke. And that's not what I'm talking about here. That's social consciousness. That's a whole different topic. But this awakening is understanding without a doubt and without a question that all of this is an illusion. And all of this suffering and all of this madness is unnecessary and doesn't need to be experienced. And I know people who have had this experience of awakening happen. In fact, Carly and I interviewed quite a few of them in our series of people whose lives have been transformed by their practice of A Course in Miracles. One of them you might want to check out is Kate Greaves. She's a teacher of A Course in Miracles that lives in Australia, and she had this awakening experience where it became very clear to her that none of this stuff was serious, that it's all part of a play that we are acting in during our lives, and it feels very real. We're wearing these costumes, we're interacting with all the other characters, and it feels very real, but it's not. It's an illusion. So when I say that there are levels to this thing, here's what I mean. if you go tell somebody who is suffering, oh, it's just an illusion, life is just a dream, that is not helpful. I know that, but I'm not going to say that to somebody who got run over by a bus. That is not helpful. I'm going to get them to a hospital. So knowing something and being able to implement it are two different things. And knowing what's really going on doesn't serve you if you can't figure out when to apply it and when to step back and let things play out the way they're meant to play out. And here's the last thing I want to say about spiritual bypassing. So, because there's a lot of confusion about this, there's a lot of misunderstanding. So, you know, in the Bible, it says that when God made everything, he made the heavens and the earth and the waters and the animals and the humans and the sun and the moon, and he looked on all of it and he said it was all good. From the perspective of source, it is all good. Everything going down here on our planet is good. It's all part of the puzzle. You have the light and you have the shadow. You have it's two parts of the same thing, right? You have the good and you have the bad, but it's all part of the whole. And we can't separate it out and say, you know, if you never felt sad, you might never know what it means to feel happy, okay? They're part of the same thing. However, when you're down here in the human experience, this feels very positive or very negative. When you are able to process these feelings and rise up and release a lot of these lower energies, lower frequency vibrations, there comes a place where you can look on it all and you can see it all as all good. Because here's the thing, all the mistakes that you made in your life, all the trauma that you suffered in your life, all the upsets that you've had in your life have brought you to this magic moment right here, right now. They have formed the person that you are today. And they have made you stronger. They've made you wiser. They've made you able to do all kinds of things that you couldn't do before. So if you use them as lessons instead of using them as opportunities to blame other people and stay in victimhood. So we want to look at every single thing as a gift, even if it feels icky in the moment. When you get to the other side of it, you always have the choice to look back and say, oh, that was a growth opportunity for me. Or that was a sucky thing that happened to me and I'm just going to keep complaining about it for the rest of my life. That's the choice. We always have the opportunity to choose again. We need to feel the feelings, we need to release them, but once they are released, we don't need to keep going back there. So we seem to be stuck on this this line of duality where there's good and there's bad, like an ant with this limited human perspective. But you can rise above the battlefield and you can get to the place where you can look down on all of this and you can see that I don't have to take these things personally. Yes, I'm a person, but this person is just one tiny portion of who I really am. There's so much more going on here. This is the body is a very dense energy, this 3D energy. And we, as I've spoken about before, are going through this ascension now, where the energies on the planet are rising. And we are going from the 3rd dimension to the 4th dimension, which is time, and on from the 3rd density to the 5th density, which is spirit. And things are becoming more and more virtual and less solid, which is good, because the solid is painful and we don't want to be stuck in there. We need to find a way to show compassion for others, but not take their story so seriously that we end up joining in a pity party, which brings everybody down. I can hold the light and shine the light and be there for someone who is suffering, but I don't have to go back down into the suffering to join with them in order to be helpful. In fact, that's never helpful. That's the equivalent of you're drowning and I don't know how to swim and I dive in to save you and then we're both drowning. The ideal is you're drowning and I'm here on the land and I throw you a life preserver and I reel you in. And that comes from me standing my ground and staying in my truth and shining my light so that you can see where to go like a lighthouse. So I don't know if this is clear. I just want to clarify a little bit about the spiritual bypassing thing. There are 3 ways to respond in any given situation. 1 is to ignore the situation or pretend the situation is not happening. And this is spiritual bypassing. This is saying, oh, it's all good, even though it's not all good. You feel like crap, but you're telling everybody that you're fine. That's spiritual bypassing. That's not being authentic with your truth. And it's the equivalent of sweeping dirt under the carpet and then pretending that it's not there. So I'm not suggesting that anybody ever do that. That comes from a place of fear. That comes from a place of, I don't want to look at the thing that's disturbing me or scaring me or bothering me, so I'm going to pretend that it's not happening. That's denial, and not the good use of denial. And then there is acceptance. And acceptance is saying, I may not like what's happening, I may not see the value in what's happening, but I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to allow life to take its course because really I don't have any control here. God's in charge. I'm along for the ride and I'm going to go with the flow. And that is the place, that acceptance, that will create miracles in your life because it creates space. The third option is the one that most of us typically choose, and that is resistance. That is fighting against what is happening. So there's ignoring what's happening, accepting what is happening, and resisting what is happening. And this is what I found in this community of people who were engaging with me yesterday about the whole victim and trauma thing, is they had made it their mission to call out the abusers, to hold people accountable, to fight the good fight. But that puts you in a place of resistance because what you resist persists. And when you insist on making other people wrong so that you can be right, nobody gets anywhere. It's just a wall. Okay, I'm talking about mentally, I'm talking about the thought process that goes on, and I'm talking about the energy that you feel. It's never about the behavior. It's always about the perspective. So the behavior follows from the thoughts. The thoughts come first, the behavior follows. So we don't try to change our behavior. We look at what's going on at the level of mind and we see if something needs to shift there. So you can tell when you feel resistant to something. You can tell when something bothers you. You get tense. Your body actually gets tense. There's tension. Tension creates resistance. And this is not a way to resolve anything. It's duality. I'm right, you're wrong. You're right, I'm wrong. Somebody wins, somebody loses. And then there's the spiritual bypassing, pretending, pink painting over the whole situation, putting, what did they say, lipstick on a pig, and pretending that it's pretty. And that doesn't serve anybody either. But in between these two energies, there's a place of acceptance. The poet Rumi said, beyond the battleground, there's a place where there's no fighting. I'm misquoting him, but you get the idea. There's the battle, there's the one side of the battle here, there's the one side of the battle here. And beyond that, there's a place of peace. And I will meet you there. That is the place where miracles happen, my friends. That's a miracle zone. So that's what I have to say for this week. Please leave me a comment. Please let me know about what you think about this. Please let me know if I did not make this clear or if you have questions. And please check out our website at miraclestribe.com. I'm Teresa McGallagher, and I love you.